The golden halls of Trump Tower hummed with their usual quiet efficiency. Employees moved through the polished corridors, careful not to disrupt the towering presence of Donald Trump himself. But that morning, a storm was brewing, one that no one saw coming. A sudden barrage of headlines erupted across every major news outlet. Housekeeper accuses Donald Trump of misconduct. Social media went into overdrive, hashtags trending within minutes. The story dominated breakfast tables, news panels, and late-night talk shows. Who was this woman? What could have driven her to make such bold claims against one of the most controversial figures in modern history? Her name was Sheila Robinson, a housekeeper who had worked for the Trump family for nearly 6 years. To those who knew her, Sheila was reliable, cheerful, and fiercely dedicated to her job. She wasn't someone who sought the spotlight, yet here she was, thrust into the center of a media firestorm. Sheila's allegations were damning: underpayment, impossible demands, and an alleged toxic work environment. Her trembling voice as she recounted these claims only added fuel to the fire. "I kept quiet for years," she told reporters, her hands clutching the microphone tightly. "But I can't stay silent anymore." The media latched onto her story, dissecting every word, every gesture. Some outlets painted her as a courageous whistleblower standing up to power. Others questioned her motives, speculating about financial gain or a hidden agenda. As the frenzy grew, Trump's office responded swiftly, calling the accusations completely baseless and a calculated attack. But behind the scenes, the former president was unusually quiet, his inner circle speculating about his next move. For Sheila, the public attention was overwhelming. Paparazzi camped outside her modest apartment, and reporters hounded her for more details. Her co-workers were stunned. None of them had ever heard her complain before. What had changed? Why now? The questions only deepened the mystery. Sheila seemed reluctant to share too much, her answers carefully measured during interviews. "I did what I had to do," she said cryptically, her gaze betraying a heavy burden. And yet, there was something in Sheila's demeanor that hinted at a deeper story, something hidden behind the headlines and sound bites. What no one knew was that Sheila wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for someone else, someone whose life depended on her next move. Sheila Robinson's name was now plastered across TV screens and social media feeds nationwide. Talk shows debated her story, with pundits on both sides speculating about her motivations. Some called her a hero, a symbol of the working class standing up to the powerful. Others accused her of being a liar, someone seeking attention or a payday. But Sheila didn't flinch. Every time a camera turned to her, she stood tall, her voice steady as she repeated her claims. "I kept quiet for too long," she said during one interview, her hands gripping the edge of her chair. "Now I'm speaking for myself and for every worker who's been silenced." Behind the public facade, however, Sheila's life was unraveling. The media attention had brought as much fear as it had visibility. Paparazzi hounded her every step, camping outside her tiny apartment and photographing her each time she left for groceries or errands. Neighbors whispered, friends grew distant, and even her co-workers avoided her. And yet, despite the chaos, Sheila never wavered. She avoided questions about her personal life, shutting down reporters who pried too closely. "This isn't about me," she told them. "It's about the truth." But there were cracks in her armor, small moments when the weight of her actions showed. Late at night, when the cameras were gone and her apartment was silent, Sheila would sit at her kitchen table, staring at an unopened stack of bills. Her hands trembled as she placed her head in them, her resolve wavering for just a moment. She knew what the world didn't. Her accusations against Donald Trump, as bold and damning as they were, weren't entirely true. They were born out of desperation, a desperate mother's final attempt to save someone she loved more than anything in the world. Sheila Robinson's name was now plastered across TV screens and social media feeds nationwide. Talk shows debated her story, with pundits on both sides speculating about her motivations. Some called her a hero, a symbol of the working class standing up to the powerful. Others accused her of being a liar, someone seeking attention or a payday. But Sheila didn't flinch. Every time a camera turned to her, she stood tall, her voice steady as she repeated her claims. "I kept quiet for too long," she said during one interview, her hands gripping the edge of her chair. "Now I'm speaking for myself and for every worker who's been silenced." Behind the public facade, however, Sheila's life was unraveling. The media attention had brought as much fear as it had visibility. Paparazzi hounded her every step, camping outside her tiny apartment and photographing her each time she left for groceries or errands. Neighbors whispered, friends grew distant, and even her coworkers avoided her. And yet, despite the chaos, Sheila never wavered. She avoided questions about her personal life, shutting down reporters who pried too closely. "This isn't about me," she told them. "It's about the truth." But there were cracks in her armor, small moments, when the weight of her actions showed. Late at night, when the cameras were gone and her apartment was silent, Sheila would sit at her kitchen table, staring at an unopened stack of bills. Her hands trembled as she placed her head in them, her resolve wavering for just a moment. She knew what the world didn't. Her accusations against Donald Trump, as bold and damning as they were, weren't entirely true. They were born out of desperation, a desperate mother's final attempt to save someone she loved more than anything in the world. The media frenzy only intensified. News vans lined the streets outside her apartment, and reporters shouted questions as Sheila left for her grocery run or walked to the corner pharmacy to pick up Marcus's medication. Each time, she kept her head down, clutching her bag tightly, her heart pounding with every camera flash. But inside, Sheila was crumbling. Marcus was growing weaker by the day, his once bright eyes now dull with exhaustion. The weight of what she had done pressed on her like a vice. She couldn't bear to look at him sometimes, afraid he'd see the guilt in her eyes. Meanwhile, Donald Trump remained uncharacteristically quiet. The man who was known for his fiery comebacks and bold statements had issued nothing more than a brief dismissal of Sheila's claims. "Totally baseless," he had said through his spokesperson. But behind the scenes, Trump was watching. He had seen the interviews, read the headlines, and even replayed clips of Sheila's trembling voice recounting her accusations. There was something about her that struck a chord, something he couldn't quite place. Trump had dealt with countless accusations before, but this one felt different. His team urged him to dismiss it and focus on other matters. "It's just another person looking for a payout," one advisor said. But Trump wasn't convinced. "She doesn't look like someone out for revenge," he muttered one evening, staring at Sheila's tear-streaked face on the screen. Back at Sheila's apartment, the pressure was mounting. Her lawyer was relentless, pushing her to double down on her claims. "We need to keep the story alive," he insisted. "The longer we stay in the headlines, the more likely he is to settle." Sheila nodded numbly, but the pit in her stomach grew deeper with every passing day. Then came the call that changed everything. The call came late one evening as Sheila sat by Marcus's bedside, gently dabbing his forehead with a damp cloth. The faint glow of his heart monitor cast a pale green light across the room. She nearly jumped when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Her lawyer's name flashed on the screen. "Sheila, you're not going to believe this," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. "Trump's team reached out. They want to meet." She froze. The air seemed to leave the room. "Meet? What does that mean? Are they settling?" she whispered, glancing at Marcus to make sure he was still asleep. "Not exactly," the lawyer replied. "They want a face-to-face meeting. Trump himself wants to talk to you. I think he's trying to gauge how serious you are, maybe even intimidate you into backing down. But this is a good sign. It means we have him rattled." Sheila's hands trembled as she gripped the phone. A meeting with Donald Trump? The very idea made her stomach churn. What would she say? What could she say? Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. The meeting was set for the next afternoon at a private location. Sheila spent the night tossing and turning, her mind replaying every accusation she had made. She couldn't shake the image of Trump's piercing eyes staring her down, demanding answers she wasn't ready to give. But every time she thought about walking away, Marcus's pale face flashed in her mind. This is for him, she reminded herself. I have to see this through. When she arrived at the meeting, Sheila was escorted into a grand conference room. The walls were adorned with gold accents, and a massive crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling. At the far end of the long table sat Donald Trump. He rose as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Sheila," he said, extending a hand. His tone was calm, almost cordial. It was nothing like the fiery persona she had seen on TV. "Please, have a seat." She hesitated for a moment before sitting across from him. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "I've been following your story," Trump began, his eyes studying her carefully. "I don't know why you're doing this, but I want to understand." Sheila's throat went dry. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Trump leaned forward slightly, his gaze softening. "What's going on, Sheila? What are you not telling me?" And just like that, the dam broke. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks as she tried to steady her breathing. The weight of her lies, her desperation, and her love for Marcus all came crashing down. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't know what else to do. My son is dying, and I can't afford his treatment. I thought if I made you settle, I could save him." Trump's expression shifted, a mix of surprise and something that almost looked like compassion. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he processed her words. For a long moment, Trump said nothing. The room was so silent that Sheila could hear the faint hum of the chandelier above them. She sat frozen, her tears falling silently onto the table. She expected anger, accusations, maybe even the threat of legal action. Instead, Trump's gaze softened, and his voice, when he spoke, was surprisingly gentle. "You should have come to me," he said finally, his tone almost regretful. "You didn't have to do all this. You didn't have to lie." Sheila blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. She opened her mouth to respond, but Trump raised a hand, stopping her. "I've dealt with a lot of people in my life, Sheila. Some good, some bad, but I can see when someone's desperate. And I can tell you're not doing this because you're out to get me." His words hung in the air as he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Tell me about your son," he said simply. Sheila hesitated, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. But as she looked into Trump's eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected: sincerity. Slowly, haltingly, she began to speak. She told him about Marcus, his love for baseball, his bright smile, and the illness that had stolen all of that away. She described the endless bills, the sleepless nights, and the unbearable fear of losing her only child. Trump listened intently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, she felt drained, as if the weight she had carried for so long had finally been lifted. She braced herself for his response, unsure of what to expect. Trump leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the table. "I can't say I like what you did," he said finally, "but I understand why you did it." Sheila's heart sank. Was this the part where he threatened to sue her? Or worse, to expose her lies to the public? But then Trump did something that left her speechless. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a checkbook, and began writing. When he was done, he tore the check free and slid it across the table to her. But then Trump did something that left her speechless. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a checkbook, and began writing. When he was done, he tore the check free and slid it across the table to her. Sheila stared at it, her hands trembling as she picked it up. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw the amount: $250,000. "That should cover his treatment," Trump said simply. And if you need more, you tell my office. We'll take care of it." Sheila couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched the check to her chest. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Don't say anything," Trump replied. "Just make sure your son gets what he needs. And Sheila," he added, his tone firm but not unkind, "next time, don't go to the media. Come to me." Sheila nodded, unable to find the words to express her gratitude. As she left the room, the weight that had burdened her for so long seemed to lift. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. Sheila nodded, unable to find the words to express her gratitude. As she left the room, the weight that had burdened her for so long seemed to lift. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope, but the story was far from over. By the time Sheila returned to her apartment, the media frenzy had only intensified. Paparazzi were camped outside her building, and their cameras flashed like fireworks as she stepped out of the car. She clutched the check in her purse, shielding it with both hands as if it might disappear. Inside, Marcus was awake, his tired eyes lighting up when she walked through the door. "Mom, were you on TV again?" he asked weakly. Sheila knelt beside his bed, tears filling her eyes as she gently stroked his hair. "Not this time, baby," she said softly. "But everything's going to be okay now, I promise." She held him close, savoring the moment as the enormity of what had just happened began to sink in. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Speculation ran wild as rumors spread that Sheila had met privately with Donald Trump. The media didn't have the full story yet, but leaks suggested that something monumental had occurred. Pundits debated the implications, with some accusing Trump of paying her off and others praising his decision to step in and help. Social media buzzed with theories, hashtags like #TrumpHelps and #SheilaSpeaks trending for days. Sheila remained silent, knowing that the truth would come out eventually. By the end of the week, Sheila had arranged for Marcus's treatment to begin. The hospital staff, who had grown used to seeing her stressed and anxious, noticed a change in her demeanor. She was calmer, more hopeful, though she kept the details of her newfound relief to herself. Marcus, too, seemed to sense the shift. His spirits lifted, and he smiled more often, even as the treatments began to take their toll. Then came the moment Sheila had been dreading. A journalist managed to get hold of her lawyer and pressed him for details about the meeting with Trump. Within hours, the story broke. Sheila Robinson had confessed to fabricating her claims, and Trump had chosen to help her rather than retaliate. The reaction was immediate and polarized. Critics called her a liar and demanded accountability, while others admired her honesty and praised Trump for his unexpected compassion. Sheila knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. She agreed to a live interview with a major network, sitting under the harsh studio lights as the world waited to hear her side of the story. The interviewer didn't hold back, opening with the question everyone wanted answered. "Why did you lie, Sheila?" She took a deep breath, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I lied because I was desperate," she admitted, her voice steady. "My son, Marcus, is my world. He's fighting a battle no child should have to face, and I didn't know how else to help him. I made a terrible choice, and I take full responsibility for that. But I want everyone to know that my actions came from a place of love, not malice." The interviewer leaned forward. "And what about Mr. Trump? How did he respond when he learned the truth?" Sheila's eyes filled with tears. "He didn't yell. He didn't threaten me. He listened, and then he helped. He gave me the money I needed to save Marcus's life. I'll never be able to thank him enough for that." The interview went viral, sparking a national conversation about the cost of healthcare and the lengths to which parents will go to protect their children. Donations poured in for Marcus, as well as for other families in similar situations. Sheila's honesty, though controversial, struck a chord with people across the country. As for Trump, he remained characteristically enigmatic. When asked about the situation at a press conference, he shrugged and said, "Sometimes you do the right thing. even when people don't deserve it. That's just how it is. In the weeks that followed, Marcus's health began to improve. Sheila stayed by his side through every treatment, her heart swelling with gratitude each time he smiled. Though the road ahead was still uncertain, she felt stronger knowing that they were no longer alone. The story of Sheila and Marcus became a symbol of resilience, compassion, and redemption. And while it had begun as a tale of desperation and deception, it ended as proof that even in the darkest moments, hope could find its way through. Years passed, and the memory of those desperate days became a distant blur for Sheila and Marcus. Marcus, now a bright and healthy teenager, stood tall on the pitcher's mound, his baseball cap tilted slightly as he surveyed the field. The crowd cheered as he delivered a perfect pitch, the crack of the bat sending the ball soaring through the air. Sheila sat in the bleachers, her hands clasped tightly, tears of joy streaming down her face. Watching Marcus thrive was a dream she once feared would never come true. After the media frenzy died down, Sheila found herself at a crossroads. The support and kindness she had received inspired her to pay it forward. Drawing from her own experience, she began working with organizations that provided financial aid to families facing overwhelming medical bills. Her story, once a source of shame, became a powerful tool to advocate for change. She spoke at community events, sharing her journey with others and encouraging them to fight for what mattered most. Donald Trump, too, surprised the world by quietly launching a charitable fund in Marcus's name, aimed at helping children with rare illnesses. Though he rarely spoke about it publicly, the fund became a lifeline for countless families, a testament to the unexpected ripple effects of one compassionate act. Years later, Sheila stood on the stage of a packed auditorium, addressing an audience of parents, healthcare workers, and policymakers. "My son's life was saved because someone chose kindness over judgment," she said, her voice steady. "We all have the power to be that person for someone else. And if we use that power, we can create a world where no parent has to feel the desperation I once felt." The crowd erupted into applause as Sheila stepped down from the podium, her heart full. Marcus greeted her backstage, his arms slung over her shoulder. "You're amazing, Mom," he said with a grin. Sheila smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "No, Marcus. You're the amazing one. You gave me the strength to fight for us." And so, what began as a moment of desperation grew into a legacy of hope, proving that even in the darkest times, a single act of compassion could light the way for countless others. Thank you for watching this incredible story. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more captivating stories like this one. Your support helps us create even more content that inspires and connects. What do you think about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Together, let's keep the conversation going.